Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thrive Beyond Cancer Summit. Today's guest, we have Brenda Stockdale. She is the author of You Can Beat the Odds, and she's the director of behavioral medicine. Welcome to the show, Brenda. I'm so happy that you're here with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yay! So I guess we'll just dive right into it. I would like to know, what is the biology of belief?
That's a great question. And what we really appreciate now, there's been so many advances in the detection of how we think, how we feel, and what we believe on not only our nervous system, but the cells and tissues of our body. So how we think and feel in any given moment is affecting the way these cells actually function. Yeah, I know, it's really great. Even the likelihood of catching a cold can be entirely predicted based on your emotional experience. So, right, and these skills, techniques, and behaviors that we now identified, thanks to advances in technology, can actually change the course of our white blood cells. So a lot of this physiology begins in a magical area of the brain called the limbic system. And in this area of the brain, sights, sounds, and feelings are translated with lightning speed to chemical messenger molecules that affect every cell, every nerve, and every fiber of your being. So it's really in this place, this area of the brain, where our beliefs are translated into our biology. Now, it's also important to know that this part of our brain isn't logical. It's not linear. And things that happened 20, 30 years ago, it can be just like they happened yesterday for this part of the brain. It's not interested in facts. It's very much interested in what your beliefs are, how you feel. So how people feel about their treatment, their belief in recovery. We use a lot of different methods to find out what that person really believes. Things might make sense logically for outcome. We might have a great relationship with our doctor, but what are our real beliefs about ourselves, our lives, and our future?
Wow, that's really deep.
It's really wonderful because it can help us to engage with our immune system on a really organic level.
Mm-hmm.
Not just mechanical, like diet or treatment,
Yeah.
but very much engaging our mind, body, spirit, and how we're really interacting with our medical team, with our family, with our own personal histories, and how we really feel about our lives. I was actually giving a talk one time, and there was this woman on the front row, and she was nodding her head so vigorously while I spoke that I actually interrupted myself and asked if she'd mind sharing what was on her mind. And she agreed, and she said that she had been diagnosed with widespread metastatic cancer. And despite chemo and radiation and all these other holistic interventions, things had stayed about the same. And every time she saw her doctor, she'd say, "Please just tell me, how long do I have to live?" And she says, he never would tell me. But finally, one day he took my hand, sat me down, and said, "Let me give you a piece of advice. I want you to go out and live your life. Do all the things you've wanted to do." And she thought about it, and she said, "I decided to take his advice. And that was 7 years ago. And I've been doing that ever since." So this rich engagement, not just with medicine, but with how we really feel about the lives we're living. And that in and of itself has become predictive. We now know that narrative, the explanatory style, the way we explain the events of our lives is predictive of longevity. So when we really think about the biology of the belief, the brain, as we now understand it, is a narrative organ. And the stories we tell ourselves about our lives and who we are affect not only the architecture of the brain, but even the way our DNA is expressed.
Wow. That just really makes me, first of all, that whole story makes me want to cry. Um, so, wow. But it also makes me think about my life prior to when I was diagnosed, and
Mm.
what I was thinking and what I felt about my life and what was going on in my life. And, you know, it was, I've had some tough moments, you know. I didn't like how my life was
Mm.
going. I didn't like how I was feeling. Um, and that, you know, this experience has helped me transform and change that. So that's so powerful. Wow. I'm going to have to process that and, you know, take that all in what you said.
Yeah, I think it's something we take for granted. You know, we hear there's a lot of rhetoric in our culture. It's popular to talk about doing what you love and finding your passion, but
Yeah.
we have real worries. We have real bills that need to be paid. We
Yeah.
have family problems. There's a lot of practicalities here, and sometimes we get lost in the shuffle. And
Yes.
I believe that it's easy to overlook. We live in a see and touch reality. You know, everything we think about is, well, what kind of pill are we taking, or what kind of food are we making? And we're really forgetting that the terrain upon which all that is being affected are our thoughts, our feelings, and the way we're interacting with our world. And these things are, this is powerful medicine. There's something called the nocebo effect. So the nocebo effect is that if we have strong negative beliefs about a particular treatment or anything really, we can experience that. Researchers took, for example, women who had breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
They told them that they were going to receive a chemotherapy, that they would be losing all of their hair. This was a aggressive type of chemo where it was non-negotiable. You know, hair loss was a given, and all the women lost their hair. But they had not received chemotherapy. They had received sugar water. So this is an example of the nocebo effect. So when what beliefs we happen to hold in our culture, in our family, within ourselves about treatment options and how we feel about those can influence results. You know, I work with people too who they may have view that, you know, chemotherapy is poisonous or toxic, so we need to work with that.
Mm-hmm.
And other people may be doing holistic or what we consider complementary alternative approaches. They might be saying, oh, I'm so sick of taking these supplements. I'm so sick of eating this food. And so we listen to, what is that word? Sick. And what's the visual image of sick? And so this is a visual representation affecting the limbic brain. The limbic brain, of course, you know, sees in these kind of pictures, and that translates into a physical reality. So we really have to get clear about how we do feel, not be afraid of those so-called negative images or feelings. So because that way we can address them directly.
Yeah. Wow. That's so awesome that it can be tracked, you know? Wow. That's amazing. Um, so with that being said, how
Yeah.
important is it to trust our gut instinct?
You know, that's an interesting issue because we do know now that the lining of the intestines is a rich receptor site for molecules from the brain, meaning the gut is called, of course, the second brain, the enteric nervous system, and it has receptor sites that take chemical messenger molecules from the limbic brain, from the emotional part of your brain, and literally lock in key fashion to the lining of our intestines, to the gut. So this reciprocity, this conversation between mind and body is huge. I mean, we experience it through salivation. You know, you think of your favorite food or see a picture, and so obviously your mouth, you know, we salivate, and that's a biochemical reaction to a word, a phrase, or a picture. Hair on our arms might stand up on end when you hear an awesome story. It could be a hot August day here in Atlanta, but the hair on your arms might stand up. We can even think of blushing. You know, I'm a fast blusher. People haven't even finished their sentences, and my capillaries have responded to that thought or to those words. So we are always walking around responding biochemically to thoughts, feelings, words, pictures. But internally, with our white blood cell activity or the the gut there, we may not be able to see what's happening. But if we really pay attention to our feelings, we may be able to perceive that kind of gut feeling. So when we look at that, it can be a rich source of information, but it can also be a little tricky. Like we just mentioned, someone may really have a compelling case for taking a particular form of chemotherapy or having a surgical technique done, but they could have a bias where their gut saying, no, I shouldn't do that. It's kind of like if you had an ex-husband, named Jimmy, and you're at a party and someone introduces you to someone and the guy kind of looks like your ex and his name is James. You might have a visceral reaction to run out of that room, but this guy could be absolutely fantastic. So our gut feeling is important, but we definitely need input from our higher brain and our higher self to be able to make informed decisions.
Yeah. That's a great example.
Right. It's not always 100%. It's part of the picture, but we do have to check ourselves out.
So with a situation like cancer or any type of chronic disease, there's stress involved, of course. And even in our day-to-day lives, there's stress involved. So how can stress save us and how can stress kill us? Because I'm sure there's a good stress and then there's a bad stress.
I'm glad you asked this. It's an important question, and it's one that we struggle with a bit, especially because stress has gotten a bad rap. Everything we hear about it is how bad stress is. But a so-called stress-free life, it may not be so healthy. If we won the lottery and we're laying around watching Netflix all day, we could even have a personal chef and be eating, lots of great healthy food. But this is not a healing situation. We were designed to engage deeply with meaningful work and people, and we were also designed to respond to novelty and enrichment. Yeah. And so when we're just having a zero stress free life, that may not contain the challenges that we need to have our immune system function optimally. Mm-hmm. So that said, there is definitely a balance. And I think your first question was how stress can hurt us, or actually how it can save our lives. If you were running from a wild animal, let's say it's a tiger that's chasing you, we would hope that your body registers stress, because that's going to give you some superpowers. You're going to be able to run faster and farther. Your digestion will stop because your body is not going to want to spend energy breaking down proteins, carbohydrates, fats. It needs access to insulin, glucose, so you can run faster and farther. You're going to get some incredible endorphins, so that if you're barefoot and stepping on sharp objects, that's not going to slow you down. You won't even notice. Changes to your vision, and even your platelets will start to clump or coagulate. So if he bats you around a little bit, or if you fall and injure yourself, you won't bleed to death. So it is an elegant, efficient system. But you can imagine what would happen if that got turned on and stayed on. What about digestion? So we've got lots of folks who are in high stress situations that they've become adapted to. We can easily be like that frog in hot water. If you were unkind enough to drop a frog into a pot of boiling water, he would jump out. Yeah. But if you gradually turn up the heat, he'll just sit there till he cooks to death. And a lot of us have just become habituated to high levels of stress hormones. I know this is certainly true for myself. We don't even notice it anymore. We're just gradually doing more and more and more, putting up with more and more and more. And so we don't recognize that we're living as if we're being chased by that tiger. So these biochemical changes that happen with that tiger can happen just on a day-to-day basis, depending on our perception, depending on how we're processing stress, and it can profoundly affect our digestion and our ability to get nutrients from our great diets and from the foods that we're taking in. Most importantly, chronic exposure to high levels of stress hormones actually produce so many pro-inflammatory cytokines that we can't supplement enough with antioxidants. It consumes antioxidants. It actually reduces the number of our natural killer cells, which is what we really need when we're fighting cancer, and even causes the end caps of our chromosomes, the telomeres, to shorten and shrink and open the door to disease. It deregulates insulin and even negatively affects gene expression. So some of these stress hormones actually block the expression of certain genes that would come to your rescue in cancer. And other stress hormones actually promote biochemical signals that stimulate certain genes to promote and spread cancer. So stress isn't, researchers aren't saying stress causes cancer, but they're saying the relationship is correlative. Mm-hmm. So yes, we need to feel inspired. We need to have challenge in our lives. And that's where our perception comes on board. New research out at Harvard shows that changing up that language, if we think of something as being an end point versus a turning point, if we think we're overwhelmed versus challenged, can change some of these, the way these hormones are structured. So there's a lot that we can do in order to turn stress into strength. But then, of course, we have to be aware of the way stress is helping, the way it's hurting, and so that we can find a balance that's just right for us, and practice some methods that can help us find more of that healthy balance in everyday living.
Yeah. I wish I knew what to do back then, but it's okay.
There's a lot of good stuff. That was one of the reasons why we put together the book. My particular program is a 6-week program on how to do this.
Yeah.
It really takes gives you some very practical ways of actually dialing down stress hormones, even while things are crazy.
Yeah.
So that your body isn't stewing in its own juices. And that's right up front in chapter 3 of the book. So the program was originally launched at the Helen and Harry Gray Cancer Center. That chief oncologist there, he treats 50,000 people a year, and he wanted this particular program, Dr. Andrew Selner, so that people could take advantage of this research in a very practical way, so that we could benefit immediately from these things. Mm-hmm. And so that program has received national attention for containing the essential ingredients that boost the overall effectiveness of most any protocol, holistic, traditional, whatever, because of being able to harness this immune potential that we've been discussing. So not to worry, it's all in there, and it's very easy to follow. There's a bunch of heavy duty research in the back of the book for clinicians or physicians, and then the actual putting the research into play has Get Started Now section, so people can learn to do healthy breathing, to downturn stress hormones, and then that automatically helps us to be able to tune into the limbic brain in a more holistic way to really perceive how we're thinking and feeling. I think for myself, I come from a long line of really wound up individuals, and I always say I teach what I need to know. So being able to get really quiet and change the breathing actually helps us to be able to access some of this important personal information, so that we can personalize this data. I think that we have all this great science, but we need to know what do we do with it? How do we personalize it for each one of us? And that's where the magic really happens.
I'm so glad you said that too, because I remember I was just not a breather. Like I would not, of course I'm breathing, but
right.
I found myself a lot of times holding my breath.
Absolutely.
That's so crazy.
Absolutely. And we have a culture, a very military culture, where we stick our chest out, hold our stomach in. And so when we breathe clavicularly up here, we can't breathe diaphragmatically. We're actually short-circuiting the process and sending a biochemical message that we're in fight or flight. So even if we're calm and relaxed and we're breathing up here, the body is stressed, even if we're on vacation. But moving our breath to the diaphragm, which is how we breathe when we're sleeping, and babies and puppies breathe until we learn to hold our stomach in and move our chest out. That's how this is healthy breathing. I was interviewed with Dr. Andrew Weil and I for an article in Oprah magazine, and we were both asked, what's the one thing you can do for your health? And we both said, breathe correctly. Because that is the absolute bottom line, where we start with that healthy breath and everything else gets built on top of that. So I had to learn the hard way. I didn't even think I could take a diaphragmatic breath. I remember the physician working with me. She said, actually, you're just pushing out your stomach. You're faking it. You're making it look like you're breathing with your tummy, but you're really not, So I had to really learn during the daytime how to reconstruct this very natural way of breathing, because I had just habitually become a chest breather.
Wow. That's so good. Learning how to breathe properly.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Wow. Yeah. Which is something you think we learn, right? Growing up, how to breathe properly.
My colleagues are going into the school system. At Harvard, they go into the school system. They teach teachers to teach children to do this, because it can improve test-taking ability and actually reduce stress-related disorders later in life. Wow. So when we're breathing up here, we actually block the chemical structure necessary to retrieve memory. So children who have studied hard and they get nervous, they blank on that test.
Yeah.
Their breathing moves right up here, and that chemical structure falls, so they can't retrieve what they've learned. Just when they breathe diaphragmatically, they can actually retrieve that. You and I experience this when we lose our car keys. We've got a lot on our mind, we put our car keys somewhere, and that chest breathing blocks the chemical structure necessary to create a memory, to lay down a memory. So we won't literally have the chemical structure necessary. Where are those keys? So in either situation, creating an experience, logging it into memory, or retrieving a memory, we need that healthy breath. So it's good for the mind and it's good for the body.
Wow. So outside of breathing, what are some other ways or other things we can do to help ourselves relax?
Well, if we start with the breathing, it does get easier, because then we put our body in a position that's more receptive biologically. We're no longer fighting that biological imperative of fight, flight, or freeze. It's awfully hard if we're having that biological imperative happening in any given moment in time to then try and talk ourselves into being relaxed. Just relax. And your body's fighting these powerful chemicals. Yeah. So once healthy breathing is on our side, then we can use all sorts of tricks. And this gets really fun. And for me, I work with people from all different backgrounds and situations. And so I really have a good time learning, what is that fit? How are we going to make this happen for this particular person? So much has to do now that we know how the mind and body work. There's a lot of CDs and products you can get that are supposed to help us, but we can make better choices if we really know ourselves. For example, earlier we talked about the limbic brain, not distinguishing reality from imagination. So if you're imagining something is chasing you, we could even take Hollywood as a better example. You're watching a scary movie, and you might, your hands might get cold, you might adopt some stress postures, especially if you can buy into it.
Yeah.
Hollywood calls this the willful suspension of disbelief. And they've been taking advantage of it for decades. And because what we see or what we visualize has this very physical effect. Now, we can take advantage of that for relaxation by using imagery or imagination to really carry us physiologically where we want to go. The problem is that a lot of stress management material will give you an image or give you a dialogue. For example, it might be, imagine yourself at the beach. And maybe there's some ocean waves in the background. And that may be lovely, but not if you were 10 and had been nibbled on by a shark. Not if you weren't a strong swimmer, or what if you were worried about global warming.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you think of the beach, or maybe you have some beachfront property and there's a little erosion there. I mean, so whether whether the beach is worrisome, dangerous, whatever that happens to be, or relaxing, is very personal.
Yeah.
And so when we move from healthy breathing is the same for everybody biologically. But once we get out of that territory, we really start getting into personal ways of relaxing that can be a little different for everybody. But certainly using our imagination for customizing it in whatever way makes sense for you works well.
And we can also use our imagination or imagery to help us heal or go in the direction that we want to go in.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And this is really interesting. There's a physician who has studied a lot. His name is Martin Rossman. He's done a lot with imagery. And in a study with Blue Cross Blue Shield, he summarized the findings that if a similar result could be had with a pharmaceutical, it would be routinely prescribed as part of every pre-surgical regimen because the results are so profound. Being able to use our imagery, imagination in healing. Even the let's see, it's the Mayo Clinic newsletter. Their cover article a few years ago was how everyone should be taking advantage of medical imagery, even if you don't have a physical illness, that it can be used for prevention. And that wonderful limbic brain that we've been talking about, whenever we imagine the sound, maybe it's the pine needles crunching beneath your feet, or maybe you're feeling a smooth, cool rock or warm sand, or hearing the birds, that auditory cortex has been stimulated by the sound, the sensory cortex by touch, the visual cortex by the seeing, and each of those areas of the brain sends a corresponding message to the limbic system, which then sends its own chemical messengers out to every cell and tissue of the body. So the Mayo Clinic newsletter was saying, hey, we're built with this technology. We might as well start taking advantage of it. So we've seen patients use this in just remarkable ways. Amazing stories. One was featured in National Geographic when I was with the Getting Well clinic in Orlando, Florida. And we had a remarkable boy who was one of my teachers. He was 13 years old, and his brain tumor had become inoperable. And long story short, he had been given not long to live, just a few weeks actually, when he came into the program. But he began using medical imagery and imagined this tumor as a big, stupid, evil planet. And he started imagining all this spaceships, very Star Wars, destroying this planet. And he began to get the vision back in one eye. He got the movement back in first one leg, then the other. He was able to go back to school for his 16th birthday. He was supposed to be dead at 13, but his 16th birthday, all the local networks came out to film him getting his driver's license. And then when he was completely cancer-free in a freshman in college, our program and his story were featured in National Geographic's Healing Miracles and the Mind. So these are my chapter 4, I believe, in the book is just full of stories like this. And I think that's one of the most inspiring parts of this work, is being able to meet people like yourself and really see how real individuals are applying the science to remarkable effect in their everyday lives. It's just incredibly inspiring work.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that story.
Mhm.
Oh, goodness, that's so awesome. Wow. So, how do we get sick? Like, is it an accumulation of different things? What is your take on that?
Well, all of these things can be true, right? We can get sick from all sorts of things. And I believe that what we're learning is that it's a really layered kind of approach.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly know that we've certainly learned that it's not just about the pathogen.
Yeah.
Right, that when like the cold research we were talking about, we can have that virus and have the exposure to it, but it's only if we're emotionally stressed
Yeah.
that we're more statistically likely to catch that cold. So our immune systems are really wired to do a grand job. They're amazing. They protect us all the time. But we all are, nobody's perfect. And we have a unique mix of genetic material, environmental stress, and personality factors, and our own experience growing up. So all of these come together. I think Bruce Lipton, he's a cellular biologist, Stanford cellular biologist that worked on the Genome Project. And he explains it in a really great way, that the genes we inherit as as people are fixed. The genes we inherit from our folks are fixed.
Mm-hmm.
But the way those genes are expressed is not. And so he explains that the cover on our genes acts as an antenna, and that it scans the environment, translates what it finds into proteins that then regulate gene expression. So in his workshops, he has a slide that reads, what affects gene expression? And the slide reads, it's the environment, stupid. And it's the cellular environment that's really creating this gene expression or stimulating this gene expression. So what is that cellular environment? When we think, why do we get sick? That cellular environment contains the key. Mm-hmm. So the genes we inherit are fixed, but the way they're expressed is not. That's dictated by that cellular environment. Now, that cellular environment includes, as you know, your diet, mm-hmm. the toxins we're exposed to, mm-hmm. the neonatal environment, all of these things, the air we breathe, the water we drink, but also Bruce brings out our thoughts, our feelings, and the way we respond to stress. Even job stress and depression have been found to cause DNA damage. Even the way we were treated as children has been found to alter that DNA expression. And that has really been a beautiful work by the CDC. And it's the largest work to date on the effects of adverse experience in childhood on disease in adulthood. And so they found that the children who were mistreated, adults who were mistreated as children, were 1.5 times more likely than others to have cardiovascular disease or cancer in adulthood after correcting for things like smoking history. So even more impactful than smoking was this early childhood experience. And their work is magnificent. The authors were very generous with their time with me in answering questions. And so we really have the whole package together, which is why these methods, these behavioral medicine methods that we've been discussing, are so necessary. Yes. Because we can't help how we were treated as children. We can't correct for all the different chemicals we've been exposed to, but we can help heal the past and the present. We can change the way we think about our lives and the way we handle stress.
So how do we do that? And I know you said like it will also help us like boost our immune system if we're able to heal our past and the present.
This is a very layered question. It's a good question, and it's very personal, depending on our unique story. So we have these broad strokes for how the research is applied, but we also have some great methodology that people can put into play to help heal that. For example, with PTS, with post-traumatic stress, that's a risk factor for the development of chronic illness. And so when we now know we have lots of different tools that we can take advantage of. There's EMDR and EFT, different tapping methods. There's ways of using narrative therapy and all different strategies that can help us be able to access the parts of ourselves that can reattach to those younger, more vulnerable selves and help establish a sense of safety and security from inside the body. And that's what we're really looking for. It's not something that sounds very logical in a world where we're sitting around maybe with, like we have heat and air conditioning, we have a roof, and we have plenty of food in our refrigerators where we all live. And so we think, what do you mean safety? But there can be a sense of urgency within each one of us, especially if we're living with a sense of vigilance, in childhood, sense of needing to protect ourselves or defend our territory, so to speak. So a lot of us have just kind of grown up very successfully and met these challenges, but the immune system may be a bit burdened. We may be a little more stressed than we need to be. And so we have a lot of great tools at our disposal now that help us to be able to rewrite some software and feel a lot more at home and safe in our own bodies.
Yeah. So how does something like laughter and play help us and like play into our healing?
Yeah, this is great because, again, we keep kind of going back to that limbic brain. And part of that limbic brain is an area called the amygdala. And the amygdala is sensitive. It really is about fear. We could think fear and anger.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously in chronic stress conditions, that amygdala is active. And all it takes is a diagnosis to send the amygdala into overdrive. That's a life-threatening experience. So now how do we really balance this diagnostic threat?
Yeah.
And now we're talking about how chronic stress could be harmful, and how do we bridge those to bring those back together? So of course we start with that nice healthy breathing so that we can kind of anchor ourselves and be our own best friend and advocate to get the best kind of treatment and put together a protocol that's unique for each one of us. And as we do that and start using visualization, medical imagery to visualize an optimal outcome, we start to reprogram that limbic brain for good things. And then if we start laughing and playing, even if it's just a sitcom, or kicking up our heels in nature, or playing with the kids or our pets, or doing something different for little bits of periods of time throughout the day or each day, the amygdala gets a completely different message. Even using lots of humor around the diagnosis. Yes. The amygdala thinks, oh my goodness, aren't we supposed to be in fight or flight right now? And that good laughter, that beautiful smile that you have starts to think, wow, really? Well, maybe it's not, maybe I'm not being threatened in the here and now. Yeah. So it's a beautiful way of helping us to feel grounded in the moment, to attach to the goodness that is right here, right now. No one has the ultimate answer on tomorrow. We always say in our groups that there could be a cure for cancer next week, but there's still the harmless number 9 bus bearing down on us on a Thursday afternoon, the so-called harmless number 9 bus, taking us out when we least expect it. So we really do have to give ourselves permission to savor the moment, to really make a plan for our health, but to give ourselves permission to be here now. And with healthy breathing, laughter and play, healthy medical imagery for our treatment, seeing what we're doing is being really effective. Being super kind and sweet to ourselves, supporting ourselves with a healing narrative can really change the terrain and allow our immune systems to flourish for many in remarkable ways that they're recovering from illnesses that no one thought possible.
Yeah, it's amazing that you said all of that, because I remember when I was diagnosed and the first thought I had was, I was in Atlanta and I was like, oh my God, I have to go back home to the Bay Area because I need to be around my siblings because they're going to make me laugh. And I know like I needed that. And then I remember after I did chemo, my hair started growing back and I had like a few strands on my on my head. I would tell my sister, oh, look, I look like Tweety Bird, And so just joking about all of that made me made me feel good, made me not be so heavy as to the reality of what was happening to me, like what was going on. And that made me feel so good. And being around people who made me laugh and made me feel good, so important.
That's so important that you were able to know just what you needed.
Yeah.
You needed your siblings and you knew why. And so it gives us a little bit of a break, and it actually, that reset for your brain actually helps it to be able to do better problem solving.
Mhm.
So by giving ourselves these moments to refresh and renew, to get revitalized, it actually helps us to be able to strategize much better, do better problem solving. If
Yeah.
you're running from a tiger, it's not a great time where you're thinking, wow, there's this really great poem that inspired me, or there's this great book I really want to write, or people I want to interview. It's just not happening. You're just getting out of the way of that tiger. So we do need these breaks in order to access these other parts of ourselves that can come to our rescue.
I love that. So, how do we unplug from negative energy? I know laughing and play, brings about positive energy. How do we unplug from negative energy?
Well, that comes up quite a bit because we now understand that there is something called emotional contagion.
Hmm.
And we can actually pick up on other people's dominant moods, feelings, etc. So it makes it good for a good life practice to actually call or critique our associates.
Hmm.
Who are we spending most of our time with? What's the conversation like? What's the tone? We live in a world right now where it's popular to be snarky, and people can have a bit of fun with that if it's making us laugh. But it can be taken to an extreme to where we're always looking for the underbelly of something, where we're really around people who are constantly whining or complaining or kvetching. And if we look for friends who can support us in more novel, unique, and inspiring, uplifting ways, we can do a lot for ourselves. So I think that we are looking at negativity in a lot of different ways. We're looking at who we're around, what are we watching, what are we reading,
Yeah.
taking a news break. There's been some interesting studies on exposure, overexposure to news because of our devices and the 24/7 nature of it has creating some negative effects for people immunologically. And so we really want to take a look at what we're feeding our minds and how we're nourishing our mind, and looking not for a Pollyanna perspective. This isn't about looking always for the good, because if we overdo this, we can be vulnerable to some nasty surprises. So if we definitely want to pay attention to the sights and sounds and information in our environment that we need to recognize. So it's not a Pollyanna approach, but it's definitely a matter of dialing down
Yeah.
the negativity, especially if there's nothing we can do about it. We're really looking, is this an actionable item? Or is this just white noise? And if it's just a negative white noise in the background, we might be able to upgrade that
Yeah.
and have a more joyful experience.
And I was also going to say, like, with negative thinking, I'm sure it's just as important, like you said, other people who are thinking negatively can rub off on us. So our environment plays a big role on how we're thinking as well. Like, being in a negative environment is very toxic and heavy, just as much as our negative thinking. So
Well
it's like,
said.
so
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. We really need to curate our environment, whether it's, what we're viewing or the people we're around, the topics we're discussing,
Yeah.
it's the whole piece.
Yeah. So overall, how do we reclaim our energy? Because getting a diagnosis like cancer, just living day to day, we can be in this cycle of, stress, like we talked about, and just being in this very low space. How do we reclaim our energy to be more vibrant again, to want to live a full life again?
I think that there's a bit of self-reflection that's necessary because everyone is different.
Yeah.
For me, when I was diagnosed years ago with a catastrophic illness, for me, what really helped were books. I'm interested in the science behind what we know works. I really didn't want to waste time. I wanted to be able to seize on some structure, but I also wanted to be inspired. And I think that for me, reading stories
Yeah.
of remarkable recoveries was key. So over the 20 years that my program has been in cancer centers, we've collected stories of the ways people have used these methods. And so we've put those into each week of the program in the book so that people can read about real individuals who put this into play. And everyone does it differently. And so that gives us permission to create our own healing path. And I think that can reignite the fact that there's not one right way to heal. If we think there's this one right way to heal, we can think, well, I'm not that like that person.
Mm-hmm.
But all kinds of people with all kinds of personalities, all kinds of backgrounds have healed from all kinds of things. I even carry around what I call my ethical volume of hope, and it's a giant volume. It's a database, a physician database, and all it is dry medical abstracts that physicians have sent in to this database of people who had complete unexplained recoveries. And I often bring the book in my private practice and to the clinics I work in and have people flip through because everything is in there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't tell you anything about the person. It's just like, this regressed. Do you know what I mean? So there's no commentary. It's showing us that people are healing from everything all the time. But then if we look at how the mind and body work, and we look at what is appealing to me and to you as individuals, we can start to tease out that spirit. And often it's giving ourselves permission to enjoy something as simple as dew on the grass, as simple as a sunrise, and the fact that we're breathing here now. And just doing that with some of these remarkable recoveries and stories and some healthy breathing can start to help us think, you know what, if it was possible for them, maybe it's possible for me.
Yeah.
And in the breath of possibility is a world of wonder. So all we need is to ignite that slender quality of hope. It's just a sliver of hope is all we need. Just the possibility of hope can really launch a whole new world of joyful living.
Wow. And is that also how we find the blessing in the mess?
That's really an interesting one. And I think sometimes that isn't necessarily apparent while we're going through trauma. I mean, at least for personal experience, sometimes I'm like, seriously, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times we've gone through awful things and thought there's something good from this.
Right.
Surely there's another way for me to get that message, right? So not necessarily in that moment, but
Yeah.
I think it's a worthy question because if we're able to view it even in the most subtle, suggestive way, that this experience could possibly be a challenge as opposed to a trauma.
Yeah.
That if we're just shifting that dialogue within ourselves, instead of saying, oh, this is so traumatic, as opposed to, wow, this is a new challenge, then we can start to look for the potential growth in those circumstances. Even if it's not available to us, we're optimizing our body's ability to see this in a more of a creative problem-solving fashion, so that our recovery from that trauma or disaster will be faster. It's kind of a longer answer, but it may not, we don't have to see the bless and the mess in real time.
Right.
In order to kind of activate those creative problem-solving genes that will help us recover faster and then be able to maybe see that. And of course, I work with a lot of people who are much better at all of these things than I am, and they could probably find the bless and the mess much quicker. I'm a bit of a slow girl there, so it takes me a little longer, but I get there. Well, thank you for the program and all the good information you're bringing to your listeners, to your viewers.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for watching. And we will see you next time on Thrive Beyond Cancer Summit.
Okay.